Hey everybody, Tony D with Screenwriting's tips and a lamp video. I already tried to do one take of this, so I'm going to try to do it again in a much more condensed way. I was yet again inspired by a recent video from The Fourth Age, which is hosted by RJ, a channel I highly recommend. Sargon of Akkad actually mentioned it in one of his videos. And I started watching it, and I really like RJ. And what he does is he breaks down the concept of heroes from a storytelling perspective, but he uses philosophy, and a lot of times he uses comic books because they're kind of very obvious. And what has happened to the comic book industry is really a microcosm of what's happening to the movie industry and the culture as a whole. So I'm going to try to bring all that together in less than 10 minutes, but it's going to be tough. So I watched the Suicide Squad 2 trailer the other day, and I was reminded of a lot of things RJ talks about, including the idea that the people behind the scenes now worship the villains more than the heroes. Now, I'll just add to what RJ said, in that part of the reason that happens is villains are cooler than heroes. The heroes tend to be generic guys. They tend to be, they're kind of boring, some of them. Like if you look at Luke Skywalker, we all sort of like Luke Skywalker from the original movies anyway. But he's sort of white bread, farm boy kind of guy. And that was sort of the hero of that time. He was sort of your everyman who stands up to fight evil. And he's relatable, but he's kind of a normal cat. He eventually sort of grows into being a Jedi and becomes cooler by the third movie. But initially, he's kind of boring. He's not as cool as Han Solo. Han Solo is very cool. But why is he cool? Why is he cooler than Luke? Well, because Han is a bit of a rogue. He's a bit of a criminal. He's a smuggler. Kills a guy in a bar in the first movie. Han shot first, by the way. So if you had the choice between two t-shirts, a Luke Skywalker and a Han Solo, odds are you'd lean towards Han Solo because he's kind of cooler. But then you've got Boba Fett. Boba Fett's an even bigger criminal, even more mysterious, cooler. And then finally, you got Darth Vader, who is probably the most evil or tragic, depending on how you look at it. He's got the coolest look. He's all black. He's kind of, he's got the deep voice, the whole thing. And that's pretty much why Darth Vader t-shirts probably sell the best out of all the shirts when you're talking about Star Wars. Yeah, some of the looks in that, but it's also about the villainy. People like the mystique of it. And when you talk about comic books, and this is going to be a weird tie-in, but people who know me are going to laugh. As you know, I've written a lot of mafia stuff. What sort of criminals were running around at the peak of comics creation in the early 60s to the early 70s? Well, the mafia, they were all in the news. They ran, I'm not going to say they run the country, but they ran a lot of things. They were big in that area. That was their sort of peak of their power. So they were, I think, probably the conscious or subconscious model for a lot of the superhero villains that you see today that were created during that period, because they just would have been in the news. And they were colorful guys with crazy nicknames. What are villains? They're colorful guys with crazy nicknames and superpowers too, which I thought was just an interesting tie-in. But the thing was, you knew who they were. You understood that gangsters they're bad people. And heroes aren't gangsters. Simple. The readers understood that too. You'd look at Captain Boomerang and you'd say, he's a bad guy. He's robbing a bank. And you'd look at Batman, you'd say, he's a good guy. He won't kill people, and he's stopping the bank robbers. So, but now you fast forward to today, and there's such a breakdown in the culture, which I think, and without going too deep into it, which messed me up in the previous take, I do believe that the Chinese Communist Party is pushing this behind the scenes as hard as they can because they're so deeply involved in our media. And I'll just say that the CCP, they can't beat us militarily yet. They certainly can't beat us economically, even now. But culturally, we have a weak spot in our culture. And they're exploiting that because we don't really have any protections on our culture. There's nothing to protect it. We have a military to protect our borders. We have, we have basically greedy guys with lots of money who protect our economic interests because they're essentially protecting theirs. But culturally, we don't really have any protections. Our only protection really was that we were united mostly as a country. That's all breaking down. And it's been breaking down for decades. The Soviets tried really hard to do it, and I believe the CCP took up the banner after they folded, and now they've attacked it in a much harder and subtler way. It's working. It's working. I think the money combined with people who are just greedy and willing to say anything have sort of magnified it. One of the things that communists do really well is they magnify their power. They may have let's say a power rated on 1 to 10 of 2, but they make it look like a 7. And in the realm of culture, that has sort of boiled over. And I think that's why we've seen such a breakdown in Hollywood, in comics, in video games, in everything. Because everybody who's the worst woke idiot has been elevated into the position of power to make these decisions, and they think they're doing something good by making the wokest and most woke-tarded decisions ever, including that there is no distinction between right and wrong, between male and female, between anything, because they're so smart and wonderful that they think they understand postmodernism, and that's what it basically says: break down everything, we'll rebuild it, and they think they're the ones to rebuild it all. So, oh, good. I got that out without going too long. Anyhow, getting back to my thought on superheroes. So writing a superhero screenplay is now impossible and pointless, unless you're going to produce it yourself, of course, and then go to town. But as RJ says in his videos, the essential elements of a hero, and superheroes especially, is prudence. That's the essential element. And there are a few more he breaks down. But prudence is key, because if you don't have prudence, and say you're Superman, you just run amok. Doesn't matter what you do. If nothing matters, if life and death doesn't matter, why doesn't Superman just kill villains? You just fly around, vaporize them with his X-ray vision, and go home. Or why stop villains at all? Why lecture people on good and evil? Why you should try to be good? What does it matter if there is no good and evil? Why does Superman do anything at all? That's what sort of postmodernism says. And now we're seeing that in the actual comics. And unfortunately, a lot of this has been driven by, I think, and it's not all women. I'm not trying to do a misogynist take here, but I do think women tend to be more nurturing, and because of that, they've been sucked down the communist rabbit hole in much greater numbers than the men have. Men tend to be more competitive, which means they tend to be capitalist. We want to get over on the next guy and make more money or whatever. We kind of have to. We're competitive that way. That's how we get the girls. Whereas women just want everybody to get along because they're like, oh, like raising kids. You want all your kids to get along. But there's a middle ground there that the people in power now can't seem to find. And a lot of those people are women, especially in media. I know the book industry is all women now. It's all women. And I was working for a publisher, and we were having a lot of problems, I'll say. I don't want to go into who they are or what I did, but I basically said to them, this is for a male audience. So we should do things that males like. And the women at this company told me, no. They said, no, men don't like that. And I'm like, well, it's so weird because I'm a man and you're not. And I'm telling you what men like. And you're just telling me I'm wrong. I mean, can you imagine? I guess you can't. But they were sure they knew what men like. And to this day, I don't really understand their project. It seemed pretty straightforward to me. Again, what a hero is, and what heroes do, what men do in the books, especially if you're writing for men. But they insisted on, I'll say, a romance, and light teasing and eroticism, and I was just like, it's not what men want. Not any of the men I know. So, that's just my personal experience. But, you see what's happened to comic books, and RJ points out the colors are muddled, and that's a woman thing. They're much more nuanced, actually seeing color. He did a whole video on that. But they're also doing these stories that don't have confrontation. Now, as a whole, superheroes were at their peak, kind of maxed out on confrontation at some point, and you were kind of numb to it after a while. So much fighting. There needed to be something else. I mean, there is too much fighting the other way, but the people currently writing, in my view, Marvel and DC are running it into the ground because they literally do not care about their male audience at all, the majority of their audience. That still somehow hangs on. But as RJ points out, which I thought was very interesting, because he follows this closer than I do now, the people who run Marvel Comics are insisting that comic books aren't for men anymore. It's for women. And I'll tell you right now, that's not true. And because women, I think, they like things that are popular for a while. And they tend to be very temporary in their taste. So yes, they do like certain hairstyles, certain clothes, certain this, certain music. And then a few years go by and they don't like that at all. That's old hat. That's for old ladies. And they move on to something else. So, the next time that trend shifts, they're not going to retain this female audience at all. It's also very weird to see women on dating sites, even close to my age, talk about Star Wars and that they're big fans. Now that they're big fans of Star Wars, I don't think they're really fans of Star Wars. They're fans of what's popular. Because I think, again, this isn't all women. Some women, they don't have this attitude. They can see it for what it is. They can see men for who they are. They say, oh, that's just men. They fight and they're competitive and whatever. I can do that, but I don't want to because that's not my nature, or, I'm a mom or whatever. But I see these women jump on the bandwagon because it's like, ooh, this is popular. See, I'm doing the popular thing. It's like when you're swiping through Tinder and you see women standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, which you will see many of them. That's a big thing. They like to go to France. Oh, I went to France and I traveled. Look at my pictures. So they all like to have a picture of themselves in front of the Eiffel Tower, in front of the tower, Leaning Tower of Pisa, and a few other places. One of the things they like now, I think, is more and more, there's a picture of them standing with stormtroopers or Chewbacca or somebody dressed in a costume relating to Star Wars. And I'm not talking about con girls who really are into this stuff, or cosplay girls, or, real comic book fans. I'm talking about your average woman who just sort of has been caught up in this trend. So if you're writing a superhero screenplay, Hollywood now thinks that's for women because they think the comics are for women. And in some ways, you can say that's true, in that they're trying to force it down women's throats while trying to kick away the men. Get away, men. This isn't for you anymore. We're women. We've taken it over. But it doesn't really work, and you can see the end result. People aren't, if you go on YouTube and see some of the commentary on this stuff, you'll see that it doesn't work. So if you're going to sit down and write a superhero screenplay, understand that right now, people are out of their minds over this stuff. The culture is being so overwhelmed by wokeness and this idea that we have to subvert expectations, that the only kind of thing you could get greenlit, you probably wouldn't want to put your name on it because it's going to be a disaster. It may get a lot of money. You may crank out something like, the Harley Quinn movie, Birds of Prey, or whatever the hell it was called, or something like Suicide Squad 2, where the villains are the heroes of the movie. And I talked about the problems with that in my breakdown of it, but it really is, they're not likable characters. They're bad guys. You have to make characters likable. I said that. I said that multiple times. And there are people who still argue with me. You have to make them likable. Villains are not meant to be likable. You can try to make them a little likable for certain moments, but ultimately, when you sit down to think about it, Joker's not a likable guy. He's horrible. You wouldn't invite him over to your house, he might kill you. You wouldn't want to be his friend, he might kill you. You wouldn't want to go out to the movies with him, he might kill you. The Joker might kill you because he's crazy and he's a homicidal maniac. But, the power of the Joker is enticing and cool, just like the power of the mafia or villainy itself. And, Michael O'Donoghue, the late great writer on SNL, used to talk about comedy, that comedy is the icing on a cake, where the cake is your message and the icing gets people to eat it. I think the problem with a movie like Suicide Squad and the new superhero movies is they're trying to give you all icing now. The message was, here's a message of hope. Here's a message about an average guy, a farm boy named Luke Skywalker, doing something epic and good. That was the cake. That would kind of be a boring movie if it weren't for all the great villains he meets along the way. That's the icing. Now you got Suicide Squad. All icing. And they can't understand why people are sick of it already. Or they just go, no, I don't want to eat all icing. There's no cake to it. There's no balance to it. It's all sugar. So, don't write a superhero movie is what I'm saying. The trend is on its way out anyway. And, the thing we need now, or the thing that is bucking the trend, are old school heroes. People who do stand up seriously and say no more. People who are traditional. Kanye West is a guy who is always on the cusp of the next trend. And what did he do for his next album? He suddenly started doing gospel music and talking about God. And I was like, holy crap. Here's the biggest rapper in the world, and he's talking about God. He's doing a gospel album. It's all going back that way. I guess you could call that the anti-woke trend that I talk about. But, that's what we really need. We need people to do a screenplay. Unfortunately, not like The Boys, which I do like up to a point. The Boys is just like the worst people as superheroes. We need an actual guy who's like the best. Someone we could all look up to and go, wow. Even when everybody was against him, even when everybody said no, he sacrificed and was a hero. And we should have all gotten behind him. That's the kind of hero we need to get. So if you're going to write a hero screenplay, a superhero screenplay, write one of them. Write something inspiring, because that's what people are thirsty for now. And understand that just like the hero in that screenplay or novel or whatever you're going to write, they're going to come after you. And they're going to try to compromise him. They're going to try to make everything wrong. Because I guess these weak people have fallen to the dark side.